The day they boxed me in like a caged animal was the day I remembered the tunnel no one else knew existed. My name is Jason Maddox. I live on a quiet 10-acre woodland plot that's been in my family for 3 generations, tucked right between the overpriced perfection of lakeside estates and the untouched wild of the Cattail Nature Preserve. Most days I wake up early, make black coffee in the same dented kettle my dad used, and walk my dog Max down to the old boathouse. My daughter Emma, 17 and still finding her footing after everything, likes to sit by the lake with her sketchbook and pretend we're the only ones left on Earth. It's peaceful. Or it was, until the fence. That Thursday morning started like any other. I drove into town to pick up lumber and some feed. Max stayed curled up on the porch in a sunbeam and Emma was upstairs asleep. By the time I got back, everything had changed. A fresh 10-foot-tall metal monstrosity stood exactly 1 foot from my front door, slicing through my garden, my walking path, and right over the old stone bench my father carved by hand. The air smelled like scorched metal and arrogance. Max was barking hysterically, his paw tangled in a razor-edged coil of fencing someone had sloppily left at the base. Emma was standing by the window, wide-eyed and pale. The panic in her voice as she called out, "Dad, they fenced us in," brought back echoes I'd hoped we'd buried after her mother died. I got Max free, my hands shaking as the wire cut into my palms. Blood dripped across the driveway like punctuation. That's when a white SUV pulled up. The HOA logo, green vines shaped like a gated arch, was stenciled smugly across the door. Out stepped Tiffany Callahan. If Botox could smirk, it would look like Tiffany every time she approached my property. Slim, surgically symmetrical, and dressed like a luxury catalog cover, she waved as if this were some casual catch-up session and not an act of war. "Jason," she chirped, "I hope this wasn't too much of a surprise." I didn't say anything. I was still staring at the fence, how it arched around the base of our sugar maple, boxed in Max's water bowl, and clipped through Emma's lilac bushes like they didn't matter. She glanced toward the house, eyes scanning it like she was mentally flipping through an appraisal book. "We had to make some overdue adjustments. That landline of yours? It's not recorded in the digital plat. Technically it was a buffer zone. You should thank us for finally civilizing it." I could feel my jaw tighten, the kind of tension that starts in your molars and creeps down your spine. "I didn't receive any notice," I said slowly. Tiffany offered a plastic laugh. "It was discussed at last month's meeting. You don't attend those, do you?" "I'm not part of the HOA, I reminded her. She waved her hand dismissively. "It's all lakeside now. Time marches on, Jason." I didn't speak. I didn't have to. The silence said everything. That's when the security officer stepped out of the SUV. A young guy, buzz cut, probably ex-military, now repurposed as HOA muscle. He handed me a paper, trespass warning for unauthorized removal or damage to HOA-installed structures. "I touched this fence," I said, "and you'll press charges?" He nodded. "It's on record now, sir." Max growled low and steady. Emma stood behind the screen door, her knuckles white on the frame. Tiffany's smile thinned. "We really hope you'll consider selling, Jason. The board's made a generous offer. You could use that money for college, a new place, something more up to date." She didn't say it, but I heard it anyway. "You don't belong here anymore." I waited until they drove off before I said anything. Emma was crying quietly. Not big tears, not sobs, just the kind of hopeless, shell-shocked trembling I hadn't seen since we buried her mother. "This was our safe place," she whispered. And it hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just about land. This was about control. Isolation. Disrespect that turned into erasure. I wrapped my hand, kissed Emma's forehead, and told her everything would be fine. It was a lie, but I needed her to believe it until it wasn't. That night, I stood on the porch, staring at the fence under the moonlight. No gates. No openings. Just walls, cold, corporate, and smug. And then I remembered. My father was a strange man. Paranoid, some said. A Cold War vet who never fully trusted the government. In 1983, he spent an entire summer building a tunnel from the back of our shed to the old boathouse down by the water, just in case they came knocking. I hadn't thought about that tunnel in years. It was the kind of story you tell at Thanksgiving, followed by a laugh and another beer. But now it was more than a story. I walked to the shed in the dark. The floorboards creaked under my boots, warped by time and weather. I knelt, pulled back the old tarp and found them, still intact. 4 planks lifted easily, revealing damp earth and a rusted iron-rung ladder descending into silence. The air that came up was heavy with history. And something else, possibility. I reached for the flashlight hanging by the door. Clicked it on. Shined it down into the darkness. They thought the fence would trap me. But fences are built for people who live in straight lines. I was raised by a man who built exits underground. I climbed down one rung at a time, the flashlight beam bouncing off stone and soil. The smell was musty but familiar. The tunnel stretched ahead, solid and quiet, untouched by time or greed. I had been boxed in above ground. But below? Below I still had room to move. And I wasn't going to waste it. They wanted a line in the dirt. I had a whole other map. The first thing I noticed was how dry it was down there. For a tunnel that hadn't been touched in 2 decades, the air was still and crisp, not musty. My father built it well: concrete ribs, rust-proof support beams, drainage slits. I walked slowly, flashlight beam brushing over the old walls. At one point, I found the shelf he used to call his bunker pantry. Still intact. 2 metal flashlights wrapped in wax paper, a folder marked "Emergency," and a sealed tin of crackers from the 1980s. Inside the folder were the original engineering blueprints of the tunnel, stamped and dated. My father's writing ran along the margins: property line, defensible. Easement here. Private exit. I followed the route all the way to the boathouse door, where a crank-operated hatch opened upward into the dusty space behind the boat racks. Above me sat the HOA-controlled lake, quiet and serene. But beneath it? A secret, a lifeline, a weapon. The next morning, I walked Max along the old fence line just like always. I nodded to the new HOA security cam that blinked from the oak tree. I said nothing as I passed the spot where the garden used to be. But I was already gathering intel. 3 days later, the first fine arrived. $125 for non-uniform mailbox design. Then another, $254, unauthorized fencing obstruction. Except I hadn't built anything. They had. And now they were charging me for resisting it. I didn't flinch. I didn't yell. I just quietly took a walk to the far end of the HOA perimeter where the private dirt trail met the public road. A crooked mailbox leaned there, paint flaking, barely held by rusted screws. That's where I met Mr. Leonard Graves. He was hunched over, wearing an old cardigan and holding a screwdriver with 2 gloved hands that shook more than they gripped. The screws kept falling into the grass. "Need a hand?" I asked. He didn't even look up. "You offering or just being polite?" I chuckled and knelt beside him. "Little of both." "Then hand me that screw before it disappears into the void." It took 20 minutes to fix the box. During that time we said very little. Just silence and the sound of age pushing back against decay. As I stood to leave, he finally looked at me. "You're Maddox's boy." I nodded. He raised an eyebrow. "I thought you moved away. Came back after Dad passed. Got the place now. You get a fence too?" I smirked. "Yeah. Right through my lilacs." He was quiet for a long moment. "Tiffany's sharp. But she forgets some of us built this place before she ever drove in with that shiny smile." I turned toward him. "You were on the board?" He gave a slight nod. "Until 2015. Before the money started showing up. Then I retired." His eyes, clouded with cataracts, still burned sharp behind the blur. "You planning to fight?" "Not where they expect me to." He didn't say more. Just tapped his cane twice against the ground as if that settled something. Later that evening, I filed an informal complaint with the city zoning department. No lawyer. No threats. Just paperwork like a good citizen. That's how I met April Tran. She was young, mid-30s maybe, but her voice was precise and her eyes moved like she was always solving a puzzle in her head. When she read my address, she paused. "Isn't that under HOA control?" "No," I said. "Technically, I predate the HOA. My land sits on a grandfathered boundary. Been that way since 1972. She frowned. "That's odd. The plat on file excludes your parcel entirely. It just shows Greenbelt." I raised an eyebrow. "Greenbelt?" She spun the screen. Sure enough, in the digital record, my 10 acres had been transformed into undeveloped buffer zone. "No one ever questioned it?" I asked. She shrugged. "Not if they thought no one lived there." I pulled a faded manila envelope from my backpack. Inside, a copy of the original property survey, 2 notarized easement grants, and a hand-drawn plat from 1972, signed by a city official long retired. April's eyebrows climbed. "This shouldn't be possible. These override the new record. Someone rewrote history." I said nothing. Just watched her connect the dots. They'd need cooperation from a clerk, maybe even a council member. This isn't a mistake. It's a cover-up. Her fingers moved quickly over the keyboard. "I'll keep this off the books for now. But someone's going to come looking." "Good," I said. "Let them." 2 nights later, Emma came downstairs with something in her hand. A tiny USB drive. "Found this in Mom's keepsake box," she said. "It says Chanders 2017. I stared at it. "You sure?" She nodded. She used to keep all her church meeting stuff there. "I think this wasn't meant to be found." I plugged it in. The audio was scratchy but clear. Tiffany's voice was unmistakable. Confident. Calculated. "Jason's parcel will be easy to reclassify once we file the rezoning package. The city clerk already has the donation." Another voice, "And the expansion?" "Tiffany, we'll fence first. Claim it was always common land. By the time he realizes, the condos will be halfway up." Another laugh. "Then, what if he pushes back?" "Tiffany, he won't. He's a hermit with a dog and a grieving daughter. Just noise." Emma's lips curled slightly. "That, which?" I backed the audio up. Played it again. They weren't just corrupt. They were strategic. They'd planned this months in advance, maybe years. Over the next few days I started getting followed. Not obviously, but enough. A car idling 2 houses down when I walked Max. A man pretending to check sprinklers 3 times in one afternoon. HOA patrols taking photos. Drones buzzing above my trees. Then came the fines. Late lawn maintenance. Hazardous debris. Unauthorized dog breed. Max, for the record, is a certified therapy dog. One afternoon, an elderly neighbor I'd barely spoken to before crossed the street holding banana bread. She looked nervous. I voted yes on the fencing," she whispered. "They said you'd already agreed. That you were selling." "I didn't know." Her voice cracked. "I believe you," I said gently. "I appreciate the honesty." She pressed the bread into my hands and hurried off. That night, I cleared off the kitchen table and spread out everything I had. Blueprints, emails, audio, plat maps, even screenshots from April's terminal. I invited Leonard over under the pretense of returning his screwdriver. He stepped in, took one look and smiled. "Tunnels, plat forgeries and HOA conspiracies. Your father would be proud." I poured us tea. "I don't want a fight," I said. "But I'm not leaving." Leonard raised a cup. "Then don't fight on their terms." I leaned over the table, pointed to the tunnel map. "We don't need to fight them where they expect. Let's go beneath them." He nodded once. Like it was already decided. For every fence they built, I found a line they crossed. By the time the first backhoe appeared at the edge of the lake, I was already tunneling beneath them. The sound of digging echoed faintly through the soil overhead, grinding steel and careless ambition. They were clearing space for what Tiffany called the Lakeside Beautification Expansion, a project that would transform and used buffer land into lake-facing condos with rooftop fire pits and curated rooftop gardens. Too bad that buffer land was legally mine. And too bad I had the receipts. April and I had filed the easement restoration quietly through the municipal back channel. A clerk flagged the parcel but didn't block it, just another bureaucratic rubber stamp buried under hundreds of requests. No HOA rep contested it. They didn't even know it existed. Meanwhile, I mapped the tunnel's trajectory directly beneath the HOA clubhouse. Not the building itself, just a 2-foot slice underneath the foundation where the storage records room sat. My father's old measuring tools were still precise, and I reinforced the tunnel walls with new beams and sealant as I worked. Slow, silent, surgical. It wasn't about passage anymore. It was about positioning. While I tunneled, Leonard got to work on the psychological front. He sent the first cease and desist letter to the HOA using his old law firm's stationery, citing boundary fraud, recorded easement violations and willful land obstruction. It was firm but measured, just enough legal venom to sting without sounding theatrical. Then came the delivery campaign. Every night for a week, I slipped out of the boathouse tunnel, crossed beneath the fence line, and slid sealed manila envelopes into homeowner mailboxes, anonymously, methodically. Inside each envelope, copies of the original plats, time-stamped HOA call transcripts, and a single-page letter that simply read, "You were lied to. This is the truth. Make your own judgment." I said nothing. I left no signature. Just paper and silence. Emma watched from the ridge line with binoculars. She'd grown quieter lately, not in fear but in focus. The way her mother used to get when she was solving a design problem. One morning she slid her phone across the table to me. A new post was trending online. HOA fences war veterans land for profit. Guess what he found underground? Anonymous user. Attached photo. Max sitting at the tunnel's open entrance, tongue lolling out with the boathouse's dusty beams behind him. A caption read, Her late husband built this tunnel for emergencies. Her daughter found the truth in it. It wasn't entirely accurate, but it worked. Thousands of shares. Hundreds of comments. People asking for updates, drone footage, even merchandise. A local reporter reached out. I ignored them for now. Then came the HOA meeting. They usually held it in the clubhouse, behind glass walls and a security checkpoint. That evening it was standing room only. More than half the neighborhood had shown up. And this time they weren't there for budget reports. Tiffany stood at the podium, smile strained, trying to steer the room through a maze of terms like rezoning optimization and community cohesion enhancement. Then the questions began. Why did you say Jason agreed to sell? Why did you claim his land was HOA property? Where's the donation trail that went to the city? She stammered, then pivoted to legal phrases. Claimed digital records must have been corrupted. Blamed legacy errors. Promised clarification soon. That's when I walked in. Through the side gate. I wasn't trespassing anymore. My easement had been reinstated that morning, notarized and filed with the city. The crowd parted as I stepped through. I said nothing. Just walked slowly to the front row and sat down, hands folded in my lap. Tiffany's face froze. She tried to keep talking, but her eyes kept darting toward me. Her voice cracked once. Then twice. 2 board members whispered to each other, stood up, and announced their resignations, citing personal conflicts of conscience. They left through the rear exit as murmurs filled the room. The meeting dissolved into chaos. I stood, tipped my hat, walked out. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the person who says the least in a room full of liars. But the biggest blow was still to come. The next morning April called. Jason, she said, I need you to come downtown. Now. In the zoning records office, she handed me a folder labeled Parcel 194A Environmental Impact Documentation. Inside were diagrams, emails, and an unfiled environmental report from 2 years ago, commissioned then buried. Turns out the HOA's expansion plan would breach a protected wetland buffer zone. The lake wasn't just ornamental. It fed into a larger ecological basin listed under Federal Conservation Watch. Building there wasn't just unethical. It was illegal. And the HOA knew. They'd attempted to dodge it by fudging coordinates and downplaying runoff risk. Tiffany had even redirected HOA funds to pay an expedited consultant, who never completed their paperwork. I didn't wait. Using Leonard's contact at a local environmental law nonprofit, we filed a federal complaint. It was swift, airtight, and packed with documentation. 3 days later, the cease work order arrived from the Environmental Protection Agency. All machinery at the lakefront stopped. HOA workers packed up and left. Orange tape went up around the clubhouse and condo project staging area. The next afternoon, I invited someone new to the property, a small documentary crew from a rising independent media outlet. Emma had reached out to them. Said it was time to tell the story. We met at the boathouse. Max wagged his tail, trotting in front of the crew as they followed me down into the tunnel. Lights on. Cameras rolling. I showed them the shelves. The blueprints. The beams. The line beneath the clubhouse that changed everything. The young cameraman looked stunned. You really went under them? I nodded. Didn't make noise. Just made progress. He chuckled. They had no idea? They never looked down, I said. They were too busy looking over everyone else. As the cameras panned over the tunnel walls, I paused, laid a hand on the concrete and looked straight ahead. It wasn't a tunnel. It was a scalpel, and I just showed them where to cut. 1 month later, the fence was gone. Not piece by piece, but in one swift, humbling morning. HOA contractors arrived without fanfare, unscrewed the bolts, rolled up the metal mesh like old carpet, and left without a word. By noon, there wasn't a single post left standing. Just bare earth and the faint line where arrogance had once tried to draw a boundary. I stood with Max and watched it all, hands in my pockets. Emma sat on the porch steps with her sketchbook in her lap, drawing something quietly. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The silence said everything. Up the road, the HOA clubhouse was still roped off with caution tape, the windows dark, the front door chained shut. Meetings were suspended pending governance restructuring, but when they resumed weeks later, they were legally required to be public and fully recorded. Attendance plummeted. Tiffany Callahan never showed up again. She was busy, meeting with lawyers, investigators, and eventually, a grand jury. Turns out our little packet of evidence had unlocked a very big closet of skeletons. Fraudulent land records. Bribery through disguised donations. A missing $28,000 in HOA funds funneled through consulting firms that didn't exist. Her real estate license was revoked. Her face, once plastered on every billboard in Lakeside County, was now featured in news reports under the headline "Local HOA President Indicted in Zoning Fraud and Embezzlement Scandal." Then came the foreclosure. Her luxury home, 3 floors, white pillars, wraparound porch, was seized and listed as a bank-owned fixer-upper within 6 weeks. I drove by once. Just once. The windows were boarded. The for sale sign leaned slightly, paint peeling. I didn't stop. I had other things to focus on. Like the garden. Emma and I dug up the weeds, tilled the soil, and replanted every bush, vine, and root that had been ripped out. The lilacs came back first, stubborn and soft. Then the rosemary. Then the small sugar maple we'd thought was dead, but it wasn't. It had just needed air and light again. Funny how things grow when you stop choking them. The tunnel remained, only now it wasn't just a secret. It became part of the county's local history exhibit after the documentary aired. They called it, "The Tunnel That Turned the Tide." Schools brought students to tour it. Max became something of a local mascot. Emma, of course, refused the spotlight, but she wrote the exhibit brochure. Every word of it. At the front page she wrote, "Not all resistance is loud. Sometimes it's just choosing not to give up." Leonard? He'd never smiled so much. He was invited to teach a community workshop titled, Civic Vigilance 101, What They Don't Want You to Read in the Fine Print. Every Wednesday at the library, folding chairs filled with people who used to nod along to HOA meetings without question. Now they asked real questions. The kind that made board members sweat. April. Promotion. She now ran the entire zoning compliance division with a direct line to ethics enforcement. She still sends us postcards whenever a shady plat application crosses her desk. The last one just said, "Nice try, Tiffany's cousin." Life, as strange as it sounds, became peaceful again. One evening, Emma painted a mural at the entrance of the tunnel. An oak tree, its roots wrapped around concrete blocks, breaking through them. She titled it, "Inheritance." "I like that," I said. She dipped her brush again. "I thought about what Mom would want to see here." Max laid beside her, snoring softly. And I finally breathed. I didn't fight with fists. I didn't scream at town halls. I didn't burn anything down. All I did was follow the lines my father left me. And when those lines weren't enough, I drew my own, underground, in silence, brick by brick. Somewhere along the way they mistook quiet for weakness. Mistook peace for surrender. But what they didn't understand is that quiet doesn't mean powerless. Sometimes it's just the sound of planning. Sometimes it's the sound right before the walls come down. Justice didn't come in a courtroom. It came in small, quiet choices stacked like bricks, until the walls broke on their own. In a world obsessed with noise and control, all it took was patience, truth, and a map they never thought to read. You don't always need to break down the gates. Sometimes you just need to remember who built the ground they stand on.